You probably heard of ayahuasca. There's a lot of information out there in the news. There's a lot of information on social media, some horror stories about ayahuasca. But simply, this is something that's been around for many, many years. It isn't something new. It is a concoction of a combination of things that results in a brew, in a drink that people use in ceremony. And it's been going on for many, many years. Recently, North Americans have found that a trip to Peru or sometimes a trip to Costa Rica will provide them a ceremony in which they can experience ayahuasca and have a psychedelic experience. And for a lot of people, life-changing. Today, we have Brian Sachetta. This is a gentleman that has experienced ayahuasca and is here today to talk about his experience. He's also an author, blogger, and a software developer. Brian has had 2 books out. I interviewed him a while ago about his books. His first book, Get Out of Your Head, Volume 1, shows readers how to effectively handle anxiety in their own lives. Brian shared with me that he struggled with anxiety for many years and decided to write this book and help others. It actually has 10 simple steps for mitigating in-the-moment anxiety. His second book that came out, Get Out of Your Head, Volume 2, is a practical take on the difficult subject of depression, which he also experiences. So, to talk about ayahuasca and his personal experience, here's Brian Sachetta. Brian, so great to have you in the studio. It's been a while since we talked.
I know, Greg. I'm excited to dive back in and have a nice conversation.
When we talked recently, we decided that we're going to talk about your ayahuasca experience and what led you to that, because you're an author and you do some coaching and you're a software developer, all these things. How did this decision to go to an ayahuasca ceremony, how did that come about?
Yeah, I would say probably 2 different things, right? So the first one being that I struggle with my own mental health, or I have had struggles in the past. I've made some progress with them, but at that time, I was still kind of in that spot of, I don't exactly know what the next step is, where to turn. I was doing okay, but didn't feel as though I was necessarily thriving in life, just kind of surviving, and was curious to know, hey, if I went and did something like this, might I learn more about myself? Might I be able to take my experiences and wrap them up in a new book? Who knows, right? I was just curious to see what I might find. The second piece was a little bit funnier in the sense that I had a friend who the year before that, he and I are in a group chat with one of our other friends. And so the 3 of us have this group chat. And I remember being on the golf course one day. This was about 4 years ago now, when he ended up doing ayahuasca, right? So I'm on the golf course. Out of the blue, I get a text. Like, we hadn't really even talked about ayahuasca before, especially not doing it. Just if we had talked about it, it was more the subject came up and we were like, oh, I wonder what that would be like,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So I get this text out of the blue in the group chat, and he says, I just booked a cabin at this place in Florida called Soul Quest, and I'm going to do ayahuasca, and it's a cabin that I can put other people in. So it was like a private little shed thing.
Right.
He said, if either of you guys want in, you can join me. And so the other guy in the group chat, he joined the first guy, and they both did it. And I was curious. I almost wanted to do it, but I was just too nervous. I hadn't done any psychedelics before, and I really worried about what would happen. And, you hear these anecdotes or horror stories online or from other people, and I was too worried that it would be a really painful, if not impossible experience for one reason or another.
So what was your biggest fear going in? What were you concerned about?
I think the biggest fear, to be honest, was, would I have a medical episode, right? I think, you hear all of these stories online, and even if it's just a couple, they stick with you and they scare you.
There was a lot online about bad experiences with ayahuasca, yeah.
Exactly. So I was worried, could I die? Would I die? Could I have some sort of cardiac episode? Who knows, right? But just the unknown being so large and scary, I said to myself, I can't do that for the moment. And also, you hear of these other stories of people saying, I got blasted off into space and I went and talked to aliens and whatnot.
Yeah.
And I really worried that that would be a very destabilizing experience for me, and one that I wouldn't know what to do with or I wouldn't be able to recover from. So I just said, hey, before anybody else does this, I'm going to just not do it, right? I want to make sure that somebody else that I know has done it before I jump into it. So the two of them go off and do it, and they came back and, they both had different experiences, and
Very personalized, isn't it? Yeah.
it certainly is. And some of their experiences were really positive and others were not as positive, possibly even negative, but they both came back and said it was such a profound experience. It was transformational in some ways, and therefore I think everybody could or should do it, right? There's an argument to be made that even if necessarily you wouldn't say everyone should do it, you'd almost want people to experience what this is like, just because it's so foreign that you almost can't believe something like that on Earth exists.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's sort of a, hey, before you die, you should really experience this kind of thing. And they really sold me on that notion. And then also the idea that, you're going and doing a lot of deep soul work and introspection and all that. So eventually they planted the seed in my mind, and I got to the point of entertaining the idea of going, and I eventually went, which would have been about 9 months after they went, I want to say 8 or 9 months.
I understand this was in Florida, which kind of I find interesting because all I hear are people going to ceremonies in Costa Rica and Peru, but this was in Florida. Tell me a bit about how that came about. Why were they able to do that in the U.S.?
Yeah, so my knowledge, like I'm not an industry expert here, so I'm going to use some terms that might not be one-to-one with what the real term is, but from my perspective, from a layperson's perspective, I will say ayahuasca, or DMT, which is the psychedelic compound within ayahuasca, is a Schedule 1 drug, I believe. And so, the Drug Enforcement Agency basically says, hey, any of those things that you are using or selling, distributing, whatever, that's a big, big no-no. There is, however, in the drug laws, and I use that as a broad term because I don't exactly know what law I'm talking about or whatever, but I remember reading online that there was some sort of legal loophole. And that loophole was with some of these plant medicines, if you will, there was a loophole in the law that said if someone in the U.S. is running a church or a religious organization and they are giving these plant medicines or drugs to their followers as part of a sacramental process, then, maybe it can be okay. And so I'm not here to comment on the letter of the law of what
Right.
was truly legal and what was not, but a lot of organizations in the U.S. were, I guess I'll say, exploiting this loophole in the sense that the law was a gray area. So I went down to Florida. This place was called Soul Quest, and they were running a church, right? And the sacrament was the DMT or the ayahuasca, where you went, you had a religious experience. It was meant to connect you back to your heart and to your soul and help you make progress in your life and transform. And so that was how they got the ability to operate. I think it was in the middle of last year, so 2024, the DEA started cracking down on this legal loophole. And so they did eventually get to the point of, essentially shutting down this place called Soul Quest. It was not necessarily somebody came and shut the operation down as much as it was they started suing these churches, and the churches, which are small organizations, really couldn't fight back, right? The legal bills just accumulate too quickly. And then you go from being a church that is bringing in some money, but is, running an actual practice or a church, to one that has a lot of legal debt and can't protect itself. So there was an interesting window. I don't know how many years that they were open, but I don't know, I want to say it was like a decade. And so a bunch of us were able to, take advantage of that opportunity and go do the sacrament, if you will.
Being a religious organization, and using that as a loophole, were there any expectations from them as to what the intent should be, or did you come in with it with your own intent?
They gave you a survey before you went there. So when you booked your reservation, as part of the reservation process, you needed to fill out this large form. And the form, had a bunch of disclaimers and also provided a bunch of context to say, this is the sacrament that you're going to go do. We are the Church of Mother Earth, or Mother Aya, if you will. And we all, everybody who applied and wanted to go, we needed to write down, hey, what are the things that I want to accomplish in going to this church and having this experience?
Right.
What might my intent be? And so they didn't, it wasn't overly dogmatic, or it wasn't like an indoctrination kind of thing where they're like, you're part of the church and you have to do X, Y, Z, and this is what to expect on your journey. It was more just, you're going to go, you're going to connect with Mother Aya, and you're going to see what you see and experience what you experience. And, the church believed that when you did that, it would open up a part of your soul or a part of your heart and help you make those transformations in your lives. So for me, it was, doing that survey, figuring out what my own intention was. And then as you do the ceremony, right, when they give you the sacrament, they say, before you drink this thing, state your intention into the cup. Well, you sort of just
Interesting. Okay.
play it through your head, if you will. You don't have
You
to
say it into the cup. Can you walk us through that part? I'm trying to imagine that.
Yeah. So getting right into it, I would say you get to the place. There's a little bit of pregame, if you will. You're sitting in some musical numbers. They're walking through, what to expect in terms of, this is how many hours that it can last. And, if you have a problem, you reach out to this person, and here's who's in your cabin and all that. Eventually you get to the point of, you line up. I think they did like a sage bath to kind of cleanse the bad juju away.
Oh,
if you
okay.
will.
Sage. Oh.
Yep. And then you would line up and they would give you a cup of the brew, the ayahuasca. And you take that cup, you go back to your cabin. So even though I had said that my friend got his own little private cabin, you always do the ayahuasca in a larger cabin. So it's for me, I think there was about 18 people with me in the experience, but there was also, there were different options and packages that you could buy. So if you wanted to have a slightly smaller group, you could pay more for that. If you didn't mind being in a larger group, you could get away with paying a little bit less for that. But inevitably, you get your cup, you go back to your cabin or the place that, the ceremony is being held for you, and you sit on a mat. You've got a mat and a pillow and some blankets or whatever you brought, right? Maybe a sleeping bag. And I think there were 2 or 3 different guides in my cabin, and depending on the size of the cabin, there was probably about that many. But for the very large ceremony, which was held in this sort of tent thing called the Maloka, there was several guides there. I want to say between 5 and 10.
Just curious, was he indigenous or just average guys, or?
No, it was mostly average people, and it was folks that came to the church, had a transformative experience,
I see,
and wanted to give back, wanted to help other people and usher them through the same kind of journey that they went through. So, you listen to your guides for a little while before you drink the brew, and they say, hey, if you have an issue, we're waiting on the side. We're watching out for folks. We know how this sort of thing goes. We know that people can have difficulties in the sense that maybe, you get sick or you get very emotional. And they said, you just flag us, we'll come over and we'll help you.
Did that ease your mind regarding the concerns about medical problems when he said that we'll be we'll be looking after you?
It did a little bit. One thing that helped also was they actually give you a very simple checkup when you get to the facility. So they'll check your vitals and they'll just make sure that nothing is out of range. And he said, the medic at the time said, we have an ambulance here. I'm an EMT. If something goes wrong, I will get that person to the hospital. And he said, do you have any concerns, right? Medical or other? And I said, I'm actually just really nervous because I don't know, what could happen medically? Could bad things happen? And he said, there's always a risk, right? I can't tell you that there's zero risk, but we've ushered tens of thousands of people through this church. Sure, we've had 1 or 2 bad experiences, but for the most part, people do great. And, to be nervous, I think that's very common. Most people that come through are nervous unless they've done it before.
So, thank you for bringing us to that point. I'm going to loop back to this curious thing about, stating your intention to a cup. That sounds a bit odd. What was that like?
Yeah. You know, I think there's some symbolism going on there, or
Okay.
a bit of a metaphor, right? Of it, the cup obviously doesn't have a personality or whatever. So it's sort of you just engaging in the sacramental process and running this loop in your mind to say, hey, when I drink this thing, this is what I would like to happen, right? So you're almost priming yourself. It's
I,
sort of the
yeah.
same way sometimes people will say, if you want to have good dreams, you think about specific good thoughts before you go to sleep, and you're almost
Oh, yeah.
priming the
Mhm.
subconscious. So, as a layperson, that's how I interpret that, is to say, hey, if I go in and I say, hey, I would like to learn more about this specific part of my life, then maybe that's the script that runs when I actually drink the tea and get into the experience.
Earlier, before we started, you mentioned that you're, even though this was 2022, you're still feeling the positive impact of ayahuasca. So I'm interested in knowing the onset of the drug, or medicine, I guess you should say, and walk us through. And please describe the best you can. I understand that it's kind of difficult to put words into it, but yeah, walk us through your experience. What was it like?
So I'm sitting on the mat. I look into my cup, and when I had filled out my survey, I was kind of the opinion or mindset of, I don't exactly know why I'm coming here. I know that in the past I've struggled with anxiety and depression. I've made progress with those things, but I thought there was still progress to be made. I knew that I wasn't happy in my career, and I was looking for, alternative paths and whatnot. So I wrote those things down in my survey. And then when I got to the ceremony and I was told to state my intention into my cup, I kind of said, hey, I have these different categories that I've thought of or that I've listed out, and yet I don't know which one we're going to cover. So I just looked at my cup and I said, show me what you need to show me in order for me to better my life.
Okay, show me.
And
Yeah.
yep. And then I drank the brew, and there is definitely a ramp up period. So I don't know the exact timing, but I'd say anywhere from 30 minutes to 2 hours that
Oh, really?
drug
Oh.
is settling in, and you're not necessarily feeling all that much. Eventually, the drug, we hope, and I say the drug, I know folks have different opinions on whether it's a
Mhm.
drug or a medicine or whatever. I'm just going to use that term. Feel free to swap it out with whatever suits you best, right? So I take the ayahuasca, and for about, I would say, between 30 and 40 minutes, I'm kind of just sitting there. I didn't really feel anything. I will say I did start crying because it's a very emotional thing. You're at this place with a lot of people who are troubled or going through challenges in their own life, and there's sort of an emotion there that you feel. And then there's also just the weight of it all for yourself of, I just took this drug that's probably going to make me hallucinate. I have no idea where we're about to go in my mind. I'm scared. I'm also hopeful. So you've got a whirlwind of emotions. And I just started crying, being like, who knows? Let's just see where this thing takes me. But this is a lot of emotion. So I would say 40 minutes in, I started feeling a little bit drowsy. And that's a bit of a telltale sign that something is coming on. And they usually say you feel that drowsiness, things slow down a little bit, and you tip back onto your mat. Like most people just want to tip back onto their mat and lay flat. You can do whatever you want to do, but often the plant or the medicine it's kind of guiding you through something.
Do you have eye shades on, and are they playing music? Or because I know that's part of, the ketamine experience and holotropic breathing. But yeah, did they offer that?
They didn't offer eye shades, but music is a big part of the experience.
Oh, tell me about that.
So I forget what the exact name is. I want to say it's like Icaros or something like that. There is a word that they use for essentially indigenous music that is indigenous to South America that they play throughout the journey. And it becomes a big part of your experience where, you hear sort of the music like riding these waves almost, right? Where the emotional intensity of the song increases and then it crashes and it increases and it crashes. And it's all subconscious from the standpoint of, you don't really figure it out until later, but you look back and you think to yourself, oh, that song that they played, that sort of pulled something out of me. I don't know how, but it really influenced the experience as I was going through it. And it's funny because they have, the church doesn't exist anymore, but I'm sure they still have it. They had like a Spotify playlist where you could go find some of the songs that you listen to on your journey. And I still have a bunch of them saved, in my music library or whatever. And occasionally I'll go back to them, and they will sometimes take you off back to the journey mentally, right? Just of, oh, I remember this was a really emotionally intense song as I was going through this journey.
So you're a little bit drowsy. You're about 30, 40 minutes in. What happened from there?
Yep. So I tip back onto my mat, and I should say for folks that have not heard of this sort of experience before, the hallucinogenic part is, for 99% of people, it is all experienced with your eyes closed. So it's essentially dreaming while awake. But the important piece is that your eyes are closed. Most people, I would say, again, 99% of people who do ayahuasca, they are not hallucinating, seeing things with their eyes open. It's all dreamlike visions as their eyes are closed. So again, you can do whatever you want during this experience, but the drug just kind of comes over you and makes you feel like, hey, I got to close my eyes. And eventually it becomes a little bit much where you're like, I kind of need to lie down. So I lie down, my eyes are closed. And at first it's just weird colors and patterns. And it comes on kind of subtly, where at least it did for me, where I close my eyes and you're kind of just like a little drowsy, a little tired. And then the next thing you know, you're like, oh goodness, I was just like underneath a flower for 5 minutes. And that was super weird. I have no idea what that was. And the flower was
real. Did the flower seem real to you, or
it doesn't. It doesn't seem real. I wouldn't say, at least it didn't for me, but it is it's just emotionally heavy, where the fact that you've never had this experience in your waking life where you're having these visions while conscious, even though your eyes are closed, it can be unsettling, right? You kind of pop up at times and you're like, what the heck was that? Why am I dreaming of being next to all these colors and fishes and stuff like that, right? So for a while, I just went through these different scenes. That's what I would call them. So I'm, underneath a breathing flower. I'm floating along with these like sort of Aztec-looking fish and animals, and they're all very, like, for me, it was very artistic. Like, it wasn't the real life version of a fish. It was like sort of cartoony, but also artsy. And I'm just seeing these different patterns and colors and objects, like they're moving around, and I might even be involved in the scene, if you will. But it was strange. And I'm sitting there kind of thinking to myself, like, I'm not saying that nobody told me that this was possible. And you look at some of the posters that you find at, like a kind of hippie gift shop or whatever.
Oh, yeah.
They are
The blue light.
right in line with this.
Yeah.
But when it hits you for real, you're like, oh, God, I kind of get those posters now.
Oh, wow.
So that was definitely trippy. That's the best way to put it. Eventually, I got into the real meat and potatoes of the experience. And so I will talk about that now, which is the profound piece, the piece that I get emotional talking about it. So it's possible that I will do that here. I'll try to hold it together as best as I can. And I do want to just give some disclaimers, which is, I'll get into a piece about sexuality and also the fact, just to put it on the table, for most of my life, right? I grew up in the 90s. Homophobia was a huge thing. And it was, if you were in middle school and you had the wrong color hair or the wrong color shoes, if you listened to the wrong music, you were gay. You were the F word. You were the H word, a bunch of bad things. And for young kids in that age, and I'm sure to a degree still today, to be called those things, it's, it was brutal. It's still got to be brutal. And so for me, one thing that I learned early on or throughout this journey was a big part of my life, a lot of my neurological wiring is this aversion to the possibility that maybe I could be gay, right? Because from an early age, that was the worst thing that you could possibly be. At least that's what your middle school classmates told you. And so I just want to give the disclaimer that I'm going to talk about that. And I also want to say, whoever you love. I sure as heck, it doesn't bother me. You deserve to live a great life no matter who you love. And, I'd say don't let anybody get in the way of that. It may come off as though I am, being homophobic at times, but this is my journey, my neurological wiring. And I would also say that, a lot of this I didn't choose, right? It was the product of that sort of homophobic society that I grew up in the 90s. And that really stuck with me. And on my journey, that really presented itself to me to say, hey, this is a big thing that like you have not known how to deal with. Spoiler alert, I'm not gay, but that is just something that, it's like an OCD thing that I've struggled with in my life, of just the question of, hey, could I be, am I, that kind of thing. Yeah. So we will get into it, but I do want to give that disclaimer. So I get to the experience, I'm going through all the colors and whatnot. And at a certain point, things definitely change, and I can feel it. And I can't quite see it yet, but I can definitely feel it. I'm still on my mat, eyes are closed, but the colors and the scenes have kind of stopped. And I start getting this like gnawing feeling, and I'm wondering what it is. And then I see in my, I want to say field of vision, but again, remember, my eyes are still closed. I see this object, almost like a piece of wood, and it snaps in half. And at that point, this was the first time during the journey that I had ever heard anything like a voice. And so one more brief disclaimer or piece of context, and then we can really get into it, is, I have my books. So they're both called Get Out of Your Head. The first one is called Get Out of Your Head, A Toolkit for Living with and Overcoming Anxiety. A lot of that story, a lot of that book was, I went through this anxious period of my life where, to put it in a specific way, was, I was pursuing this girl that I was really interested in, had kind of, fallen head over heels. And she went away for a few months on this long kind of backpacking trip. And that became a very anxiety-provoking experience for me, where I'm sitting in the States, like completely head over heels for this person. In the relationship, I'm trying to, start it and also hold on to it at the same time. We weren't dating, but it was just somebody that, you get that special feeling and you're like, I want this one to work. And for me, I found, that feeling a handful of times in my life, but certainly not, every day or every year. And so it just became this anxiety-provoking situation where day after day, it was sort of like, oh goodness, like I have to open Instagram and there she is, like hanging out with a new guy that she met on her journey and whatnot. And it's certainly like, what's done is done, and it didn't work out. It's not to speak poorly of her in any sense of the word. It's just to give the context to say that that book that I wrote was really the product of going through a very anxious summer with this uncertain relationship. And so during that summer, because I was anxious every single day, and that was really no place to be, and I, for one reason or another, I decided that, hey, I was going to try to give this thing a shot, and this was the relationship that I wanted to pursue. Therefore, I was sort of cutting myself off from alternatives. I was so anxious all the time, and I eventually said to myself, dude, if you're going to go through this, right, if you're going to put yourself through this much anxiety, you need some coping strategies. And so throughout that summer, I developed a lot of tactics for myself that helped me manage my anxiety. And that essentially became the first book. Was, hey, this person went off on this vacation. I was so anxious. I developed a lot of coping tactics. And then I talked about all of that in a way that was hopefully presentable, maybe a little entertaining for the reader. Now, obviously, there's other stories in there, but that is the core driver behind that first book. So when I'm sitting on my mat and I see that piece of wood snap, the voice that I hear, right? And so last piece of context is that girl, the code name that I use for her in the book. I'm not gonna dox her, obviously. The code name that I use for her in that book is Tess. And so the piece of wood snaps, and I hear this voice, and it says, Tess was not the one. And at that point, I'm just like, what the heck are we talking about? Because that came out of left field. And sure, like, I guess that's helpful, but I wasn't thinking about her. I didn't necessarily think that me coming here was a product of her. And, it probably wasn't. But to hear that as the first thing that I heard, I was a little taken aback by that. I didn't know what to do with it. And then I start to feel, again, I get that gnawing sensation. And I'm wondering what that gnawing sensation is. And I start hearing this voice, and I take it to be my parents. Now, I'm pretty close with my parents. I have been for my whole life. They're great people, have supported me throughout my life, helped me get to the various places in my life that I've tried to get to. Very loving people, all of that. And I've always dreaded, the idea that, hey, at some point in my life, right, like they're going to pass away, and that's going to be heartbreaking. And so this gnawing voice is saying to me, hey, you need to let go of us, as in your parents. And I'm like, oh, goodness, I don't know where we're about to go on this journey, but that feels like too much to me. I don't know if you're trying to lead me on some journey of saying they're going to pass away very soon or something like that, but I don't know if I can handle that right now. So I pop back up off my mat, open my eyes, and I'm like, this is a little too much. Like, I don't know where we are about to go. And so there was a resistance in me of, I'm scared, I'm nervous, I don't know what this thing's going to show me. I'm afraid that it's going to be harrowing or bad, So eventually I take a breather, and eventually I get back down on my mat and I close my eyes. And this is where, things kind of get real crazy. If the dancing fish or the breathing flower weren't crazy yet, it gets a little crazier. So in that dream state, I see the cabin that I am in. Again, my eyes are closed, but I see that cabin. And I'm looking around, and all of a sudden, it was almost as if I was like a drone. And the drone zoomed up through the ceiling, up into the sky, kept going until we were in outer space. And at this point, I am freaked out, but also kind of like, well, people always said you get launched on a rocket off into space. We're here. Let's see what happens. So I get up there and I see two celestial orbs. That's like the only way I can describe it, like two star energy things with different colors. And the minute I got up there, I just knew that those orbs represented my parents. Hard to describe, very hard to describe, but I just knew it. And they say, Brian, we brought you here to help you find love. And I once again, I am awestruck, dumbfounded, whatever. Okay, why do you want me to find love? Why did you bring me here to find love? What does that even mean? And they're like, you need to just let it happen, relax, follow the process, we'll guide you, we're going to help you find love. Again, I have no idea what to do with any of this at this point. I'm like, this makes no sense to me, but whatever, here we go. So, again, I talked about, a few minutes ago, the disclaimer of like, what my therapist would call homosexuality OCD, and the fact that I've struggled with that in my life as a product of, that 90s upbringing where kids were mean, and they're still mean today, but I'm sure maybe in slightly different ways. Back then it was really, hey, you had the wrong shoes, you had the wrong shirt, you were gay. So I get to this place in the sky, and my parents are saying that they're going to help me find love. And I have, I'm still befuddled as I tell the story, because it also still just doesn't make a ton of sense to me. But I'm like, okay, let's do it. And at this point, it's almost as if like the camera, the lens, the perspective shifts a little bit, and I see this bubble form in the sky, and my parents, or these celestial orbs, are on the left-hand side of the bubble. And again, none of it makes any sense, but let's just go with it. I'm going to try to stop saying it doesn't make any sense and just tell the story. So I see my parents on the outside of this bubble, and in the bubble, I see a bunch of doors. And I'm thinking to myself, what the heck are these doors? What are they doing here? Why is this here? And my dad says, Brian, this is how we're going to help you find love. I'm like, okay, I don't know what doors have to do with this, but let's do it. And so this orb, right, is essentially shoots what I would call like cosmic energy through the bubble over to the right-hand side of the bubble and hits the first door at the top. And the door opens, and I see this vision. And I guess one last piece of context that I forgot was a big piece of my, fears of, internalized homophobia or homosexuality OCD revolve around a fetish that I have. If folks aren't familiar with that term, essentially like, a sexual attraction to an inanimate object. And as a kid, and it's a pretty common one. I don't necessarily want to talk about it in this exact moment. It's we could get there. It's just a little tough, right, on podcasts and all that. So I'm trying to keep one or two cards close to the vest. But as a kid, right, I knew pretty early on that I had this different thing, right, of, being attracted to an inanimate object. And like I said, it's a common one that is actually like, a woman's piece of clothing. And so the rational part of me was like, well, it's like a ladies thing. It's not necessarily like it doesn't really mean that you're gay just because you have this fetish, but it is different. It is weird. And at various parts of my life, my mind got the best of me to think, well, is it the ladies or is it actually the article of clothing? And so could this article of clothing pass on to a guy or to somebody else? And could you be attracted to that? And so at various points in my life, I went down these spirals of, again, I had the internalized homophobia combined with the fetish. And I thought to myself, what if I really am gay and I want this fetish thing to be involved with guys, right? And again, it's very difficult to talk about because I'm very much of the belief of you are who you are, you love who you love. I have no judgment against that. This is just my own story and a product of my upbringing, right? And so I struggled mightily with that kind of thing throughout my life. And here we are getting to this experience, and my dad says, hey, I'm opening this first door. Let's take a look inside. And this vision pops up, and it's a picture of me and a picture of a man. And the two of us are doing the fetish thing, if you will. And I'm like, oh my goodness, what the heck is this? And my dad says, Brian, we brought you here to show you that you're gay. You've been gay your whole life. You've lied to yourself at every turn. And we're finally here to stop the charade. And I was floored. I could not believe any of it. I was completely torn up, and I popped up off my mat. I opened my eyes, and I thought to myself, I can't do this. I got to go home. I can't go through with this. I cannot believe that my whole life led up to this moment of me finally seeing behind the curtain what reality was. And I was in such despair, right? Given, like I said, my neurological wiring, my upbringing, that kind of thing. I sat on my mat for 5 to 10 minutes just thinking to myself, and again, like in the grand sense of things, right? Especially given the fact that I don't look at other people and judge them, right? It wouldn't really be actually that big of a deal to be gay, but it is very hard for one to come to terms with that, given that societal programming, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
So I spent 5 to 10 minutes on my mat just thinking to myself, like, this is so painful. This is so profound. I don't know how to deal with this. But I eventually, at the end of those 10 minutes, I had just had enough. I said, I've been through a lot of pain in my life. And if I'm gay, you know what? Screw it. And I get onto my mat and I close my eyes. And sure enough, we go right back into the scene. And my dad has this big smile on his face. And I'm like, Dad, what are you doing? And he's like, son, did you really think I brought you here to tell you that you were gay? Did you really think that you didn't have any idea what your identity was like after 31 years of living? And he just starts cracking up.
Really? Wow.
And he's like, I can't believe you fell for that. You should have seen your face. And at this point, I'm ping-ponging between all these profound emotions, thinking to myself, on one hand, despair, on another hand, disbelief, on this other hand, what the heck is going on? Why are they toying with me like this? But that scene that I'm looking at of me and a man, doing the fetish thing, it evaporates. And my dad's like, dude, I was kidding. I can't believe you fell for that.
Oh, wow.
And that was it was so crazy. Again, what I would say, right, about ayahuasca in general is it's almost hard to believe that your brain can come up with that. It's writing some movie script, if you will. I sure as heck, in my own conscious mind, I don't think I could come up with that. So I was just fascinated by that. But obviously, I'm still in this bubble scene in space, and so I'm like, we got to keep going. So obviously, there's a bit of relief there. When you are doing DMT or some of these other psychedelics, people will often say that there is an emotional purge. And so what happens is you have these sort of breakthroughs during your experience. And during those breakthroughs, there is some emotional weight that is lifted. Not just like the emotion, but also in your mind. And then also there's like a bodily aspect to it as well.
Oh, really?
And I actually remember, so a lot of people that do ayahuasca, like the purge that most people are familiar with is vomiting, right?
Yeah,
It could either be you're going through a really tough time and resisting the experience and therefore you vomit, or you have a breakthrough and you have this emotional purge and the connection to the body is that you throw up. I was scared of that because I'm like, nobody likes to throw up. I'd rather not do that, but if it happens, it happens. And so when my dad had that revelation or whatever, gave me that revelation of saying, I was just kidding, I can't believe you fell for that, I actually passed some gas. And then I kind of, had this kind of moment, just complete relief. And it's so fascinating to see how the body, the mind, the emotions are connected like that in that experience. So that was fascinating. Anyway, we're still in this scene in space, in the mind bubble thing. And my dad says, okay, let's open up the next door. So he opens up the next door. They're all kind of stacked on top of each other on the right-hand side of the mind screen, if you will, in space. And he opens the door, and it's just me and a guy and no fetish. And I'm like, dude, I thought we just figured this out. I thought we just went through this. And he's like, nah, I'm just kidding. Like, I just wanted to see if I could get you again.
Oh, man.
I'm like, oh my God, okay. And at that point, I burped, and that was some of my relief, and I might have even cracked my knuckles. But again, some sort of tension released through this emotional purge. And I'm like, okay, man, like, what's next, And so he says, see all those other doors down there below the two that we've already opened? We're going to open up all of those, and we're going to find your repressed trauma. And I'm like, okay, man, here we go.
Were you afraid?
So I was very afraid.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know what to expect. I've heard from some folks that they had repressed trauma and it came to light during their own experience. And I didn't know what it could be or what it would be. So I was very nervous. And quickly, we kind of started rifling through the doors. It's almost as if they all opened and closed in a quick sequence. And I saw some colors and whatnot, but no real visions. And my dad says, did you really think that you had repressed trauma that you didn't know about? And I'm like, dude, I don't, you tell me. I don't know what to believe in this experience. I mean, in my heart of hearts, no, but who the heck knows, right? So he's like, I get it, but here's the real reveal. And I'm thinking to myself, what is he talking about? And it was, I'm going to use the term sleight of hand, but it's kind of the wrong term. It might not necessarily be totally the wrong term. It was sort of like a look over here kind of thing. So as we're going through all the doors on the right side of the screen, I forgot about the fact that there was a big door in the middle of this space mind bubble thing. And it was almost as if at that moment, my dad took a spotlight and shined it on that big door. And he's like, this is why you're here. And at that point, I'm like, dude, I don't know. I don't know what this is going to be. I don't know if I'm ready for this. It's already been a wild ride. So what is it going to be? And he's like, when you're ready, you open the door. And so I opened this big door. And what I see is the picture of a woman doing the fetish, if you will, just in a room, and that's all. And my dad says to me, you've spent so much of your life preoccupied with this fetish, concerned that it meant all sorts of negative things for you and that it was this horrible thing that eventually somehow tied you back to being gay, which, you did not want to be. He's like, it doesn't have to be that difficult. It's just a fetish. And when you're ready, you find somebody who, likes you for who you are, who loves you and respects you. And once in a while, you engage in the fetish with that person, and that's it. And at that point, I'm bawling my eyes out because it felt like the culmination of years and years of repression and anger and doubt and questioning. And to see it reduced down to this simple takeaway, I almost couldn't believe it. And a lot of folks might say, hey, they might react in certain ways and say it's just a fetish, and sure, like it is, right? But everybody struggles with their own things. And this was one of my big struggles that I repressed for a long time. And what I would say is I was so ashamed of this fetish for a very long time that, the internet is a wild place. Whatever you want to find online, and believe me, this is not a dangerous fetish. Again, like I said, it's just an article of a common article of clothing. It's a pretty normal fetish if you look at the data. But it was something that I struggled with quite a bit. And if you go on the internet, like for every fetish that exists, there are sites that you can go to where you can watch, videos of the fetish being engaged in or whatever. And so I would go to those sites, not all the time, but on occasion and, in my bad moments more often than I would like to. But I was always so ashamed of this fetish that I never entertained the idea of having a real relationship with somebody, putting this on the table and saying, this is part of me. It's not my whole self. It's something that I have struggled with, but it's something that, together could be a little kink, could be a little exotic part of our relationship. It doesn't have to be the whole thing, but once in a while, maybe it comes into play. That idea, even though like in the back of my mind, it was sort of like, yeah, that'd be cool if that happened. I never entertained the idea of being like, I'm going to tell somebody that I'm dating about it and it's going to happen. And that experience was really the moment to say, it's all okay. You've repressed it for a long time. Everything is now clear. You understand who you are, what you like, and all that. And to go forth and to partake in this fetish at some point in your life with somebody that you love and trust, that is the work that you now need to go do. It doesn't need to be the biggest thing in the world. It doesn't need to be monumental and all significant, but it needs to be some part of your relationship. And at this point, right, things are starting to tie up a little bit, if you will. It wasn't necessarily this clean, this sexy. I'm kind of editing it down a little bit. There were parts of the journey that came after, whether it was like seeing scenes of specific friends or talking to somebody that I had an argument with or a challenge with in the past, right? Some of those things come and go in your mind during these experiences as well. But this was the core part of the experience or the journey that I know my psyche, my mind, my soul, whatever, wanted to show me. And as we're sort of leaving this experience, my parents are talking to me again and saying, look, you've struggled so long with anxiety and depression, and we hate to see that for you. We hate the fact that at times it seemed as though you didn't want to live and you didn't like life and you didn't enjoy it. And that breaks our hearts. And they also said, you've struggled on the depression side about existential and larger than life issues. Fighting the notion of life and death and existence and the afterlife, climate change, big, big ideas. And my dad says, all of those things are actually irrelevant. Maybe not in the grandest sense, but especially in this moment, they are irrelevant. They said they are distractions from you doing the actual work on yourself that you need to do. And that was a really profound statement to me, right?
Mm-hmm.
One thing that really came to mind was the author Jordan Peterson. He is known for this quote of saying, clean your room. What he's really getting at is, he says, clean your room before you attempt to clean the world. As in, before you go out and try to solve these huge overarching problems in the world and cast judgment and point fingers and all that, look internally and figure out what is going on inside, figure out that battle and deal with that battle before you turn your attention to the larger world. Because not only is that a more helpful approach, but it's a very common pattern, in the psychology space, that people get consumed or obsessed with large ideas as a distraction away from the work that they need to be doing internally. And so I'm sort of coming to, right? And this voice is saying, remember, at some point, you find that person that you love and you engage in the fetish with them on occasion. But also, stop obsessing about these ideas, these sort of irrelevant ideas. Now, if we're really nuanced, it's like, yeah, climate change is a big deal. But at the same time, what's more important? That you figure your life out and you stop being so depressed all the time? Or that you go and solve climate change, which, again, big issue, but let's be honest, is any one person going to solve that issue? Probably not, right? So it's not to say never think about it again. It's just to say, put things in perspective. Remember what is most important for you in this specific moment and chapter of your life. Focus on those things. Let go of those large existential distractions. Stay on the path, do the work, and you will get where we want you to get. The funny thing is, right, you go into an experience like ayahuasca, and maybe, right, we talked about intentions and all that, maybe you say to yourself, I want to talk to ayahuasca and learn how I'm going to make $1 million, or how I'm going to become a professional athlete, or whatever. Sure, you can have your intentions, but I do believe that at the end of the day, what that thing wants to show you, it's going to show you. People will say that when you do a psychedelic drug like that, it shuts off the default mode network,
right,
which is essentially your ego. And whatever's below the ego comes out. And so most likely what's below that ego is not going to be $1 million. It's going to be, what are my fears? What are the things that I've repressed? What are the things that I haven't dealt with in my life? How do I see things in a different light such that I can move forward in my life and make progress? So I obviously left out a few details or like side stories just to keep things tight and clean. But that was the overall experience. And I will say that, it was challenging leaving that experience, because I did on some level hope that it wouldn't exactly say, hey, get in your car, drive down this highway, take this exit, take that turn, go to a field, open up a box in the field, and, there'll be buried treasure there, right? I obviously didn't expect that to happen per se. But I did want there to be more actionable stuff in that moment, right? Of, okay, I'm leaving the place. What can I do tomorrow?
What do I do from here?
Progress?
Yeah.
The idea of essentially, finding a girlfriend, finding a wife, and then eventually getting to that point of trust of engaging in the fetish, like that's a ways off, and that's a lot of work. But what I will say is, looking back, it reoriented my compass, right? To say that's the direction in which you need to be heading. It's not necessarily like a two-step formula that you can go enact tomorrow, but that's the direction that you need to be going in your life, and the way, the direction that your mind wants to go, and the direction that is going to lead you to some kind of fulfillment. So that was all the takeaways and how the journey went. It was fascinating. I will say the only thing was I was a little not depressed afterward, but I was.
It was a come down.
A come down for sure, in the sense that, the idea of, hey, maybe it will tell me that simple thing. It hadn't. And I felt as though, yes, the information that I got was life-changing, but it was long-term kind of life-changing, not necessarily in that moment. You know what I mean? Like I still had a lot of work to do. It uncovered the path, but I still had to walk many miles on that path. And so I'm grateful for the experience. It taught me a lot. It was transformative. But again, it has its own agenda, and it might not necessarily show you something that you can go enact tomorrow and all of a sudden be, eternally happy.
Often people talk about the integration piece. They talk about set and setting, and this sounded like a wonderful place to be at in Florida. And you explain your intent going in, and you got what you needed, not necessarily what you wanted. And I hear that quite a bit too. Now, the integration piece, it doesn't sound like you actually had a therapist help you through integration. It sounds like you went through integration on your own after this experience, and it still lasts.
I think that's an accurate way of putting it. They do, like when the church was still open, they would hold what they called integration. And it was more sort of a period where you and your bunkmates would share your experiences in hopes that putting real words behind the experience would integrate it into you. And also, hearing the journeys of other people would help you integrate your own story in a better fashion. So there was a few different integration periods, and it kind of depended on, how many trips you took, I guess, right? Some people did 3 separate ceremonies throughout that weekend. The average is 2, but I did that first one, and, as I was leaving it, I guess one little detail that I left out was the voice in my head, which, seemed like my dad, was saying, we told you what you came here needing to hear. Do not go do another ayahuasca journey. Do not sign up for one tomorrow. Don't go do it. And they said, all these little doors on the side of your mind or on the side of this space bubble, we'll open them all back up and we will wreak havoc. So that was enough for me to say, I'm not going to go do that thing. What that in turn did was there were some folks who, like I said, they did 3 ceremonies. And if you did the 3rd ceremony, you missed a day of integration or like one of the integration periods or sessions. So I was able to do 2 integration sessions, and it was just helpful to hear other people's stories and understand how they integrated their own experiences. And one thing that I really do want to mention is the 2nd integration period I did, where I told my whole story, the kind of thing that we just went through. I told it in this small group, maybe 6, 7 people. And there was this, I want to say ex-Marine, big, strong dude, honestly kind of looked like David Goggins, if anybody knows who that is. Just like very masculine, tough, all that. And I tell my story, and he wasn't crying, but you could tell he was moved. And he was African American. He had kind of that like almost slang to his voice, right? That's the only way that I can say it. I'm sorry. He was like, that right there, that's some man stuff. And I was like, are you talking to me? He's like, that's some man stuff. And he's like, all excited, like, kind of like a Marine or whatever, right? And I'm almost taken aback. I'm like, oh, okay. Like, what did I say? And he basically goes on and says, I too have a fetish. I too didn't want to talk about it for a long time. Eventually, I found my wife. I told her about it. I was very scared to tell her about it. And she said, I'm not going to do that for you all the time, but if you want to do that on occasion, I'm happy to do that for you because I love you. And that like that did integrate a lot for me to say, this isn't just some pie in the sky idea that you had during a DMT trip. This is something that real people deal with and have overcome or have gotten through. And so that story that my friend Matthew told me, I was like, man, I'm very glad that you spoke up and you said that, because that hits super close to home. It gives me, sort of a bit of a role model. And I'm grateful, because I'm like, now I'm willing to walk that path, knowing that I'm not the first person in history to do it. And I knew I wasn't, but to hear somebody in that moment say that to me, that was really profound.
Was it your dad, or would other people talk about? I've heard people mention, Mother Ayahuasca, a spirit. I mean, what do you think was behind that?
I'm not tied to any name. It felt like my parents to me.
Oh,
You could say it was a deity. It was Mother Aya. It was a psychological representation of my
yeah,
parents.
that's what I was thinking.
I'm
Yeah.
not going to fight anybody on that. I don't care. I just know that that voice felt like my parents to me. It helped me, and that's all I need to know.
It took, yeah, I guess it took that form so that you'd be able to hear it and be open to it, I guess. Yeah.
It is
Amazing.
actually pretty fascinating. Yeah.
Here we are, 2025. That was 2022. What's stuck with you from that experience today?
I'm trying to think of what to say because there's a lot.
Hmm.
And I'm trying to give the slim down version, right? The slim down version is I currently have a girlfriend. I've told her about the fetish. She has said to me, she's like, I don't care about the fetish. It doesn't bother me. She's like, I'm happy to do it for you. She's like, it's an article of clothing that I'm not going to wear in the summertime when it's too hot, but when it's in season, sure, I'm happy to do that for you. So it was one of those things, like I was alluding to, where I couldn't just go home and, enlist or enact 2 steps and be like, bam, I'm healed. I did the thing, right? That took me a long time to get to. And the piece that I was sort of like, I don't know if I say or not say was last year, I, really put a lot of effort into dating. I went on the dating apps. I had a system down. I know that like if women are listening, it's probably not the sexiest thing in the world, but I was determined to find somebody. I spent 20, 30 minutes a day on the apps. I paid for the premium subscriptions. I went on many dates. I think in a period of 3 months, I went on like 20 first dates. So I was committed and I was dedicated. And the funny thing about that was, I kind of looked at the ayahuasca journey and the dating and was like, well, the ayahuasca kind of made it seem as though I'm just going to get out there and find somebody and that'll be that. And, I inevitably you go and you date people and there are people with whom it doesn't work out. And there was one that was very, very painful. And there were times where I was like, wow, like that much pain, why go through this process? Almost as if I know the whole thing was painful with the ayahuasca and the fetish and whatnot, but this is too much. If you had told me it was going to be this difficult, I might just be like, I'll sit in my misery, But I will also say that when you're in it, when you're in the pain, it feels that bad. When it finally heals and when you're over it, you look back and you're like, I would not want to go through that again. But I'm here where I am today. I have a relationship, with a great person, and we love each other, and was able to do that work with this person. And like I said, we've talked about the fetish. She doesn't care about the fetish. She's happy to engage in it with me once in a while. And so, yeah, I guess that has stuck with me from the standpoint of one way or another, right? It wasn't necessarily conscious of, okay, I'm going to go find somebody and then we're going to talk about the fetish, right? It was more, I'm on that path of knowing that I need to find a relationship. And then when I find a relationship with whom, somebody with whom I share that trust, I can open up and I can do more of that work that Mother Aya or, the representation of my parents was nudging me towards. So, again, it's really stuck with me. Maybe it's more subconscious, but I look back today and I think, wow, like I've kind of walked that path. And I'm not saying, that things are over, so to speak, right? Life is a journey and there's lots of twists and turns. You never know, right? It's like you date somebody, maybe you stay together, maybe you break up. Who knows what the outcome of any one relationship is? But I think I can look back and say that, I have those tools integrated now to say relationships are a priority for me and my psyche. I need to continually make them a priority. And then also, like that fetish piece, it can't get repressed again. It doesn't. And the funny thing is, it's not even, it only becomes a big deal when I repress it, which is most things in psychology, It's like when it's out on the table, it's sort of like, oh, we talked about it and, it'll happen once in a while, but if it doesn't happen this week, next month, whatever, not a big deal. We talked about it. It's a healthy relationship and that's that. So, yeah.
I don't want to take up a lot of your time, but what occurs to me is what we were talking earlier about there's just so much information on the internet about ayahuasca and all the horror stories. what could you tell our listener if someone is interested in looking into an ayahuasca ceremony, possibly in Costa Rica or Peru? Looking back on it, what would you recommend to someone that's thinking about it?
Yeah, I would say take it seriously. There have been reports of people who, thought it was something of a joke or just an entertaining thing, and then
Right.
go and they do DMT, and Mother Aya is like, listen, buddy, I am a force to be reckoned with. You should not have messed with me, right? So take it seriously from the standpoint of whether you believe it's a religious experience or not. Know that it is on some level, quote unquote, sacred. Do the work, as in set your intention, do the introspection, and also, they may tell you to follow a certain diet leading up to it because of the way that, the plant medicine can interact with the foods that you eat. Take that seriously. Get the most out of it that you can.
Wonderful. Great advice. Because like I said, there's a lot of information out there. So winding down, I gotta say I was awestruck that you find it in yourself to be this vulnerable and taking the risk, and especially talking about some very personal and sensitive issues, especially around sexuality. I'm very, very grateful that you took the opportunity and that you're willing to be this open and to share your story for our listeners. I thank you with gratitude.
Likewise, Greg, thanks for having me. How I would respond to that is the Get Out of Your Head brand, the branding that I do, or the writing that I do, and all the content that I write in the mental health space. Like, I am trying to live the message, right? It's about authenticity. It's about being real with yourself. And I would also say that there were times, right, where this fetish made me want to potentially off myself, get to the point of not wanting to exist anymore. And I think about the two things that I just said, and I say to myself, there's somebody else out there who is struggling super hard with something like this.
Mm-hmm.
Who am I to withhold this information and not help that person? I know it's brutal. I know, sure, I'm being vulnerable. It's challenging, but I try not to think about myself as much as I do the other folks that I might be able to help. And I also know that this space, right? Obviously, there's been a movement in terms of like homosexuality is much more part of society and accepted these days, but like some of the fetish stuff and whatnot is not quite there, and I just think of the people who are in the shadows being like, when are people going to stand up for me? I'm standing up for those people. And I would also say that, it's very difficult. We celebrate a lot of folks who are different these days. And while I think that's great, I also think that like, we're overlooking some pain that people are dealing with, right? If you're going through something like what I just described on this podcast, you have probably dealt with a ton of pain. And to just celebrate it, I know it's well-intentioned, and I totally get that. But we also have to make room for that pain and allow people to grieve and heal. And that's one of the things that I'm trying to do.
Well said. And once again, gratitude and a lot of respect for what you share with us today. Folks, there's 2 books that Brian has out there on Amazon and elsewhere, wherever you get your books or audiobooks. Get Out of Your Head, Volume 1, shows readers how to effectively handle anxiety in their own lives. And Get Out of Your Head, Volume 2, is a practical take on the difficult subject of depression. Brian Sachetta, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks, Greg. It was a pleasure. Always nice talking to you.